What's going on, guys? Welcome back to my interview series here exclusively on my YouTube channel. Now, my guest today is a four-time Emmy award-winning host and one of my personal heroes, Chris Van Vliet. Now, this interview, fair warning, was done over Skype because in-person interviews are a little impossible right now with the current pandemic going on. And his picture's not going to show up on screen until about 35 seconds in, but after that, it's completely smooth sailing. The audio should be crisp. Everything else is golden. And we talk about a lot in this interview. We talk about careers in broadcast journalism, our fandoms for professional wrestling, even some mental health stuff, how to stay positive and avoid burnout in a very passionate field and making sure you don't lose that passion. A very worthwhile conversation I was able to have with Chris. And without further ado, here it is, episode 2 of my interview series with special guest Chris Van Vliet. Check it out. All right, guys, I am here with four-time Emmy-winning TV host. You've seen him all across YouTube interviewing many different wrestling personalities, from wrestlers to ring announcers to everyone in the sphere. He's all over the wrestling media sphere, and he even does work for All Elite Wrestling now. This is Chris Van Vliet. Chris, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Liam, thank you so much for taking the time to have me on.
Absolutely. Now, you've been an inspiration to me for many years. I mean, going back to when you started putting out these interviews, I remember when they were pretty infrequent just because, you weren't getting as many guests. And now you said, what was the goal last year? Was it 50 or 100?
The goal was 50. We ended up doing 100.
Yeah, which is incredible. So
Yeah.
you've really been all over the wrestling landscape. How can you take me through why you decided to grow your YouTube channel so immensely compared to what it was 2-3 years ago?
Well, it kind of starts with what my background is. My background's in broadcasting. I've been a TV host since I graduated from college. I've been so fortunate and so grateful to be able to work in that world. And I've just been a wrestling fan my whole life. So the two worlds would kind of intermingle every once in a while. When Raw or Impact would come to town, we would do an interview for the TV station that I was working for, basically saying, hey, the show's in town tonight, tickets start at $20. And I thought, well, if I've got access to these people and we're just doing this short little interview or this little soundbite that will air on TV, and I have this person in my presence, why don't we do just a little bit of a longer interview? And that's kind of where it began. I started doing these interviews with, my very first one was with Bobby Lashley in 2007 when he was the ECW champion. But when I did an interview with Mick Foley and I did an interview with Jack Swagger and Eric Young, Jeff Jarrett, when these people would come to town, we'd do this interview on TV that would be literally like a minute long. And then I would be like, hey, if you have some time, why don't we just do another longer interview? And I would put that on YouTube. And I thought, this is fascinating to me as a fan. I'm getting the questions answered that I care about. Someone else must enjoy this too. And I put them up on YouTube. And that's kind of how it all began. So I started seeing that when I was putting the wrestling interviews on YouTube, they were gaining a lot more traction than anything else I was putting on YouTube. So I just decided about 2 years ago, I'm going to double down on this. I was taking the interviews when they were convenient to me. When they were in town or when there was a wrestling show in town, I would do the interviews. I thought, what if I was willing to kind of go out of my way a little bit? Or what if I was on vacation or I was on a work trip in Los Angeles? What if I could spend an afternoon getting another interview? And that's when it really started taking off, when I started putting that extra effort in, doubling down, really betting on myself and making that content happen for myself.
Yeah, that's incredible. I mean, it definitely seems like what started as just like a segment on TV has really shaped your career. And you mentioned how when you were putting them on YouTube in longer form, they were getting a lot more views than you were anticipating. How did just the popularity of those interviews kind of change your career or your outlook on where you wanted to go in your career?
It wasn't honestly till recently that I thought that YouTube could actually be a thing for me. I mean, I worked in broadcasting for 15 years, both in radio and television, and I love it. That's something that I've been so passionate about my whole life. And I've been fortunate to be able to basically travel the world, interview the biggest stars in the world, from Tom Cruise to Oprah to Sandra Bullock to Gerard Butler, Will Smith, you name it. And that's always been something that I've absolutely loved. And I just kind of realized that if I really niched down into wrestling and I had this great access, that it could really work for me. So it was really just the last year or so that I'm like, I love doing TV. TV is so great and something I always wanted to do, but I have so much freedom over here to do the interviews when I want. I could put out 6 interviews like I'm doing this week. I could put out 1 interview like I did last week. And there's no one, knocking on your door or yelling at your desk saying, you need to do more, which is what happens, in the broadcasting world. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's how it works. There's a show every night when you work in the broadcast world. But in YouTube, you decide. You're the content creator and you're your own boss.
Yeah, you said it best. The beauty of YouTube, I feel, is definitely you get to make your own deadlines. You get to lay out your own schedule. And while having that extra person there to kind of force you to, make sure you meet certain deadlines can be beneficial, it does lead to, burnout and exhaust and all that. And when it comes to TV, because that's a kind of side I'm more unfamiliar with your career with. You're talking about how you've interviewed guys like Gerard Butler, Tom Cruise. Where did those press junket opportunities come up?
So if I kind of run through my career here really quickly, it'll give you
Go for it.
a good scope for how things work. So
Sure.
after graduating from college, I got an internship in a small town about an hour away from my hometown. So I was living at my parents' house, driving an hour each way for this internship that obviously didn't pay anything. That internship turned into a job, but we're talking like news reporting, news anchoring. So that was my first job. I spent a year and a half there as a news reporter and news anchor at Chex TV in Peterborough, Ontario. And I thought, I don't really want to be a news reporter, forever. And I just kind of thought I had more to show, like more personality to show. And to make a long story short, I ended up getting a job in Vancouver for MTV2 Canada, which really opened the doors to entertainment reporting for me. From there, I was hosting a show in Toronto, also as an entertainment reporter. From there to Cleveland, I worked for the CBS station there. I was the entertainment reporter there, which was incredible. I covered the Oscars 5 times and the Grammys 4 times. I won a couple of Emmys when I was there. And then I was in Miami for 5 years hosting an entertainment show. It was live every night, 7:30, called Deco Drive. And that's basically in almost all those jobs, except for the first one, I've been able to interview celebrities, musicians, actors, you name it. And it's been such an amazing, amazing thing. And I think that being able to interview people all across that different spectrum, I think has helped me become a better interviewer as well.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the entertainment world, I feel like it crosses over with wrestling a lot more than people give it credit for. I mean, we see guys like Batista, The Rock, John Cena making that transition, but a lot of, Hollywood and wrestling characters kind of blend together. You see certain wrestlers taking inspiration there. So yeah, definitely tapping into the entertainment world, I feel, is a great way to understand pro wrestling better. As for pro wrestling and your just personal fandom, where did that come from? Has that been something you've been following ever since childhood, or was that more of a recent fascination?
Well, in the 80s was the golden era of wrestling. And I would have been 4 and 5 and 6 years old. And I remember watching it at my grandparents' house. My grandpa would have it on. It's not like he was a huge fan, but it just happened to be on Saturdays. So I grew up watching the larger than life characters, of course, Hogan and Ultimate Warrior and Macho Man, but also Sergeant Slaughter and Repo Man and Coco Beware. That was my first introduction to it. And when I got to high school, I was on the high school wrestling team. And you were basically told, you don't watch that stuff. That stuff's fake. What we're doing in here, this is real. And I was very much like, yeah, no, I get that. We're the athletes in here, and that's the TV show. And I had this best friend of mine who watched wrestling every single Monday night religiously. And we would talk on the phone a lot. And as soon as 9 o'clock hit on a Monday night, he would go, all right, I got to let you go. Raw's about to come on. This is when Raw used to start at 9, when it was a 2-hour show. And I'm eventually I was just it's whatever. I'll just, just stay on the phone. I'll put it on with you. And I just got hooked. And I just was blown away by, number one, the athleticism, but I loved the charisma. And it was just oozing out of them. And at the time, the big storyline was McMahon and Austin. And I was so drawn in by that. And it was just from there, I was all in. And when I get excited about something and when I get passionate about something, I'm like 1,000% in on it. So I watched Raw, switched back between Nitro during commercial breaks. I'd watch SmackDown. I'd watch ECW was on Friday nights. I watched everything, and that was really it for me.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'll never forget my first Raw. It was the walkout episode when Triple H was in charge, but the locker room had walked out, and
Oh
then
yeah.
Laurinaitis came out to relieve him of his duties, and I was just like, "What is this?" I was trying to watch the 2011 World Series, and I flipped to the wrong channel, and then I don't know what it was. I remember seeing Cody Rhodes in a face mask, and I was like, "He looks like Richard Hamilton. That's so cool." And then just from there, just never missed a week. What I'm curious to know about is after a couple years for me, I started realizing, wait, there's more wrestling than just WWE. I started watching TNA Impact back when AJ Styles was there with the clean shaven look and Christopher Daniels, Kurt Angle, and all that. Eventually, I learned about Ring of Honor, New Japan. Even most recently, within the past 2 years, I've become fascinated with the British independent scene, companies like Progress, ICW, Rev Pro. When did you start to branch out from just WWE, WCW, the two major companies at the time, and really start to embrace the independent scene?
I don't even remember how I found out about it, but there was an independent company in Toronto called AWF, Apocalypse Wrestling Federation, which I watched
Super metal.
Kim,
Yeah.
right. I
Yeah.
watched Gail Kim debut there, and I don't remember how I found it. I think I just happened to be like looking at on Google wasn't even really a thing then. This is like the year 2000. I looked it up on like I don't know Yahoo or like Ask Jeeves or one of those old ones, and I went to this show and I'm like, oh my God, there's more wrestling outside of just Monday night. And that was really what sucked me in. I went to every single one of their shows at this tiny little bar in Toronto called Cactus Pete's. And we would get there early. So we would have like a front row seat. And that was when I really, kind of realized, oh, there's more to this. And I wanted to be a wrestler so badly. I was a backyard wrestler. I did attend wrestling school for a little bit in between me doing that and going to college. And eventually I just, had to make a decision. Was I going to continue with my wrestling school or was I going to continue with my school? Because you couldn't do both at the same time. Something had to give. And I wanted to be all in on whichever one it was. And I ended up deciding to stick with my communications degree, which ended up leading me down the path that I've had with my broadcasting career.
Yeah. That's fascinating. And just the world of wrestling, and I feel like just the world of media as well is just so totally encapsulating. There's so many different facets of it. When you were reaching out to people, obviously you got contacts through major promotions like WWE when they were in town at the local TV stations. How did you eventually get into contact with independent guys? Were you reaching out via social media, or was it just like, you knew a WWE guy and then he was able to set you up with another contact down the road? How did you eventually foster those relationships with independent stars?
Usually I would go to independent wrestling shows, and kind of everybody knows everybody in the wrestling world, at least in, some sort of way. So I would go to independent wrestling shows. I worked as a ring announcer for a few different companies, and you start to get to know people. So that was how the relationship started to be fostered. So if I knew the person, personally, I would just say, hey man, I'd love to do an interview with you sometime. Or sometimes it'd be like, hey, do you happen to know so-and-so? Oh yeah, guy's my buddy. Could you put us in touch? That's usually how the independent relationships would work. But I would say that going to those independent shows, number one, makes you familiar with the product on a broader level. Because I think there's a big distinction to be made between wrestling fans and WWE fans. And WWE fans just watch Raw and SmackDown and don't even really know anything else exists. And wrestling fans as a whole, they'll watch anything and everything. And I think there's a big distinction to be made there.
Yeah, absolutely. You touched on, being in the independent scene, working as a ring announcer, and now we see you making, sporadic appearances for AEW, All Elite Wrestling. I know you've interviewed Cody Rhodes before, the Young Bucks and all that. How did that opportunity come about to eventually work as like a backstage reporter, also ringside reporter? How did that come about? Was that just through the contacts with Cody and the Young Bucks, or was that kind of, oh, we've seen what this guy's been doing in his career the entire time. Let's give him a shot.
Well, I think it began with me interviewing Chris Jericho, and that kind of got the snowball rolling. So this is the interview I did in the backseat of his car
Oh
last
yeah.
January. So this was like the first interview he did after signing with AEW, and it was huge news that he had signed. And I happened to be able to get this interview through a mutual friend, actually. It's who I, got in contact with Chris Jericho months before that for the first interview I'd done with him. So I think the interview with Jericho then led to me being able to interview Tony Khan. And then the Tony Khan interview led me to be able to interview Cody. And then the Cody interview led to the Young Bucks. So, I basically have done these interviews with all these, very powerful people in AEW. And it just, I think through doing that series of interviews, I covered a lot of AEW events as well. I think they just said, hey, would you want to be part of our first show on TNT, October 2nd in DC? And I said, sure. And that was really it. It was as simple as that. It was through meeting those people and having those conversations that they said, why don't you come be part of the first show?
Yeah, that's got to be just like a surreal experience from going from, working at local stations to interviewing some wrestlers to eventually being a part of really what we'll look back at in 10 years as a seismic shift in the pro wrestling landscape. What was that day like, that debut episode on TNT? Because you've interviewed probably hundreds of people at this point. Do you still get the butterflies? You still get nervous when a new opportunity like that comes up?
Oh, absolutely. Especially when you know how big of a show this was going to be. I mean, over 1 million people watched that show live on TNT. And just, to be able to fly, basically, I left my job in Miami on a Monday. I flew to DC on the Tuesday. We had a production meeting, and Wednesday went to the arena and did the show. So I was standing there backstage. I knew what part of the show our segment was going to be in. And I was just standing there backstage in the gorilla position, like, okay, like this is happening soon. And then I would watch all the other segments that went before. And I'm like, all right, like after this commercial break, like that's our segment. And sure enough, they hit the commercial break. They walked me out to the ring, and I'm standing there with a microphone, like ready to go. And next thing you know, they point to me and I'm like, oh, like this is it right now. Like this is happening. There's a lot of like it's so different. Like I've done TV my entire career. It's so different when you're doing it in front of 13,000 or 14,000 people. Being able to feed off of that energy, man, it was exciting.
Yeah, one thing that's particularly interesting that we don't see often is most backstage reporters or commentators kind of make their name for themselves after they're signed to the company. But when you popped up on AEW, I don't know if you were trending, but you were definitely getting a lot of buzz on Twitter. People were saying, oh my God, that's Chris Van Vliet. I've seen him do his wrestling interviews on YouTube all the time. How did it feel to kind of see that reaction of, no, people already know who you are and they're just happy for you that you have this opportunity, and now you have a chance to expand your audience even bigger than it was before?
Well, AEW had a really good track record of hiring people that had, made decent names for themselves. Alicia Toot worked Double or Nothing, and she has a very big following on YouTube. Jen Decker, who's doing the stuff for a lot for them now, has made a big name for herself. So I think for me to be part of that mix, it just seemed like, just another person that was actually following similar footsteps to the other people who had done that job before. But what was cool about when I appeared on that episode was I just felt like everybody who had ever watched one of my interviews felt like they had a piece of that. They were like, oh, that's my guy. That's my friend Chris. And now he's on this show. But that's what felt really cool about it.
Yeah, it's got to be just very surreal. I know I've said that so many times, but just the progression of this conversation when we've been talking about your career, going from, wanting to be a pro wrestler and getting your communications degree to eventually having a role on a major wrestling show, even if it is a one-off appearance, it's still, that can never be taken away. That's in the history books forever. How is the relationship with All Elite Wrestling? I'm sure it's positive, but I've seen they're kind of have like a rotating cast of backstage interviewers. Jen Decker was doing a lot of stuff with them, and now she's kind of moved to the top 5. Is there room down the road for potential more appearances?
Well, they've also got Lexi Nair's doing a lot of stuff, and Alex Marvez is doing a lot of stuff, and Jen's doing stuff. I mean, there's a lot of people on the broadcast team. So, yeah, the relationship's great. And I would imagine that if they need me to work, I guess when the shows start to look normal again, it's obviously a pretty small skeleton crew right now. But yeah, they've been so great to work with. I worked on that first show. I worked in another show the 4th week of AEW television in Charleston, West Virginia. I was part of the Road 2 stuff that they taped in Atlanta. They've been so great. I'm such a big fan of what AEW is doing. I'm just a wrestling fan in general. And to be able to be a broadcaster and a wrestling fan and to be able to meld those two together was such a cool thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, you did touch on the fact that when shows get back to normal, and I did want to get your opinion on that. We're in a bit of a really weird period, not only in the world, but in the wrestling world as well. We've never seen stuff like this before. I remember when they first announced that there was going to be an empty arena SmackDown, I jokingly tweeted the clip of The Rock and Mankind having their empty arena brawl. And I was like, okay, it's a one-off SmackDown. It'll be fun to watch. And now it's like, no, this is every week. Dynamite was empty except for their locker room and the crowd. What's your kind of gut reaction to seeing pro wrestling minus the fans?
Well, I'm with you, Liam. I thought it was going to be a one-off thing, and then things were going to get back to normal. The fact that it's continuing to go on, I actually think is a good thing, because if they were to just cancel Raw, SmackDown, Dynamite, we'd have no entertainment. Sure, we'd have Netflix and we'd have YouTube, but I think it's like a semblance of normalness. And there's just this semblance of sure, stuff might be crazy in the world, and maybe you're in quarantine, or maybe you're, not able to leave your house depending on the state that you live in. But wrestling's always been that thing that unites us. And I love that Monday night at 8:00, Friday night at 8:00, Wednesday night at 8:00, it's something you can set your watch to. It's appointment viewing. And in this world of television, where very few things are appointment viewing outside of live sports, I love that this can bring us back together. Sure, it doesn't look like the Raw, SmackDown, or Dynamite that we're used to seeing, but it's still going on, and I appreciate that a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing that WWE would always say throughout the years that I always kind of scoffed at was they would say, oh, no, you are the biggest WWE superstar, you, the WWE Universe. And for so many years, I thought that, they're just pandering to us. They don't really mean that. And now seeing wrestling minus the fans, you kind of realize no, it's almost the entire product is due to those genuine fan reactions. When I go back on the network and watch my favorite moments, I'm not looking for cool moments that happened in a dead arena. I'm looking for Dolph Ziggler cashing in Money in the Bank. I'm looking for Sting debuting in WWE. I'm looking for Cody's debut entrance on the first episode of Dynamite, stuff like that. Couple very interesting things happened on Dynamite this week that I would have loved to have that crowd reaction for, that being the debut of Brody Lee as well as Matt Hardy, both guys competing in WWE. For Matt Hardy a couple weeks ago, the last we saw of Luke Harper, I want to say was around October when the Roman Reigns, Daniel Bryan stuff was going on. What's your reaction to these guys eventually transitioning from WWE to AEW directly? Do you think AEW needs to focus more on creating their own stars, or do you think it's beneficial that they're taking guys who were mid-card stars for the WWE and giving them that opportunity that they've been wanting for so long?
I'm so excited to see what Matt Hardy can do if he's completely unleashed. The stuff that he did in Impact Wrestling was amazing. Unfortunately, a lot of people weren't watching Impact Wrestling at the time and weren't able to see the Ultimate Deletion or the other stuff that he was doing with Brother Nero. But now that this is going to be able to be done on a bigger stage, man, I'm so excited. Also, I don't think Luke Harper really had the chance to show what he was capable of in WWE. I think what we saw on Wednesday night on Dynamite is already better than a lot of the stuff that he did on WWE. So I'm excited about that. To answer your other question, AEW has created a lot of their own stars, a ton of their own stars. Orange Cassidy, MJF, the list goes on and on and on, but they've created so many of their own stars. And I think that it's a great mix of the guys who have been elsewhere and are now in AEW and are able to basically have new life, and the guys they've created kind of from scratch that were indie guys that were kind of coming up and now have their chance to shine.
Yeah, absolutely. Orange Cassidy was a guy I remember seeing I went to a couple of Evolve shows last year, and I was just like, this guy's money. He's a mid-card gimmick, but he is so randomly charismatic. I loved it. And also another guy I was fascinated with that I also saw at an Evolve show was Darby Allin. I think he's really carved a name out for himself, and for whatever reason, I get a lot of Jeff Hardy vibes from him. He just has that kind of charisma that you can't really explain it. He just has it, and the fans just get behind him. Taking a look at AEW in a greater lens, they not currently, but in the past extended their TV deal with TNT. They're looking to travel, do more shows. Obviously, it's kind of a weird spot right now with where we're at with the coronavirus. Where do you see AEW in, let's say, 5 years? Are they a legitimate competition to WWE, or are they still going to be trying to find their voice? Where do you think they'll be in 5 years?
Well, I think they've already found their voice. And the fact that 2019 was as big of a year in wrestling and as exciting of a year in wrestling as it was due in large part to AEW. And I think that what they're doing week in and week out is amazing. And I'm excited to see what the same conversation is going to be like 3 years, 4 years, 8 years from now, when AEW's really found their footing. I mean, as we sit here right now, AEW's put on some amazing shows, but the company's barely a year old. I mean, their first show was May of 2019. So in terms of actually doing wrestling shows, they're not even a year old. So if this is what we're getting already after just 7 or 8 months, I can't wait to see what happens 7 or 8 months from now, and then years from then. I don't know that they want to be in competition with WWE, but I certainly think that they want to get to a point, and I don't want to speak for them, but I think it'd be exciting for them to get to a point that when people think about pro wrestling, they don't just think about WWE or WWF back in the day, that they think about, oh, there's a few options. We've got this one thing on USA, and we've also got this other thing over here on TNT.
Yeah, 100%. One thing I did want to touch on that we talked about a couple of questions ago was the empty arenas, but for WrestleMania, because we talk about empty arenas for Raw and SmackDown. It is what it is. We get some matches. We get some, they showed Bray Wyatt versus John Cena at WrestleMania 30 on last Friday. They showed a past elimination chamber match, stuff like that. When it comes to WrestleMania this year being now a 2-night event, taking place from multiple locations, they say, but going to be in front of an empty arena, is that something, as you said, you wanted WWE to still continue producing live shows as well as AEW? It's a constant in entertainment. It's got that live viewing, big fight feel. Does WrestleMania kind of be in a different light because it's that big stadium show, or do you think it's still essential that, no, we just got to power through and make the sacrifice this year and have it in front of an empty crowd?
Well, I think that if WrestleMania gets canceled or postponed, it sends the wrong message. So I appreciate that they're moving forward with the show. And Vince is an absolute genius and an absolute brilliant businessman. This isn't going to look like Raw or SmackDown in the same way that WrestleMania doesn't look like Raw or SmackDown. So I'm excited to see how they make this look different, because I'm confident that they will make it look different, and they're going to make it worth our while, because the fans are worried about how this is going to look. How do you think they're dealing with this inside WWE? They're probably super concerned with the image that this is going to put out there. So I know that they're going to be, I'm assuming they're going to be trying extra hard to make this a super special show.
Absolutely. And I did want to kind of touch on coronavirus stuff because it's shell-shocked the entire world. I remember for my campus television station, we've covered this story since its inception, since it was one case in China to growing to Italy and now eventually in the United States. And with wrestling companies doing these, WWE specifically saying essential personnel only, that also leads to, a bunch of indie promotions were supposed to come to Tampa this year, as they do every year whenever WrestleMania is around, to hold, a week's worth of events, and those all get canceled. How does that kind of, this whole global pandemic affect people like you who are trying to go out and do interviews potentially and talk to different talent? I know you're based in Florida, so Tampa is fairly close. How is this whole current crazy situation affected you?
Well, it's not affecting me as much as it's affecting my friends who are wrestlers or promoters
Sure.
or referees who make a ton of money during WrestleMania week. And my heart goes out to them because, not only could they not work WrestleMania week, this can't work, period, right now. And for those people who a year or two ago, those wrestlers who a year or two ago went, man, the indie scene is so hot right now. I'm going to go all in on my wrestling, go all in on my merchandise, and this is going to be my main job now. My heart goes out to them because if you can't wrestle, if you can't have these gatherings, what are you going to do? So that's going to be tough, but I do know that we're all going to get through this. And I know that the best is yet to come. So sure, it might be tough now. It might be tough for the next few weeks or maybe even a few months, or hopefully not, but maybe even another year or so. But the best is yet to come out of that. And to quote Plato, necessity is the mother of invention. And I think that these people who are wrestlers are so talented in what they do because they're great at inventing stuff. So I feel like everyone's going to find a way to make this work for them.
Absolutely. Another thing I wanted to touch on was just, you mentioned all your friends who are on the independent scene. Who are some guys that you've been able to talk to that don't necessarily have that spotlight right now, but you definitely see them being on the come up, seeing them in major promotions in future years? Who are some guys that you want us to look out for in the wrestling scene?
I was so excited when Matt Cross started working with NWA. I've been a friend of his for like almost 10 years. So I still think Matt Cross has more to offer. So there's someone I will throw out there. He's doing some stuff with NWA right now, but man, that's a guy who's insanely talented. I've also had the good fortune of working with people who, as soon as they walk into the locker room or as soon as they have their match, you go, that guy, man, he's good. Like Austin Theory, who is now signed with NXT. I worked with Darby Allin, who is obviously doing his stuff with AEW. Man, it'd be hard for me to pinpoint it down to just like a few people, because I think that anybody who is on an indie show, especially in like a decent sized city, has earned their spot on that show, because there's only so many spots. If you have a 6-match card, you're probably only going to bring in 20 workers. So, that means you're one of the best 20 workers in that area.
Yeah, 100%. Another thing I wanted to touch on was the fact that you're kind of a jack of all trades, if you will, when it comes to the media world. You have so much going on with the wrestling interviews, with your day job in Florida and all that. But one thing I've experienced, even in my couple years in college alone, is that when you're juggling all these different opportunities, at first it's very exciting. But after a couple weeks or a couple months even, there's a real chance of burnout and worrying about, how do I stay focused, stay positive, stay goal oriented. When, I don't know if you ever feel that or anything, but when it comes to staying kind of stress free, what's your go-to in terms of maintaining that focus, maintaining that passion, and not losing it due to being overworked?
I had this epiphany in my senior year of college, and I know you're not there yet, so maybe you'll have this epiphany eventually. But I remember waking up like in September in my senior year of college, and I loved being in college, and I had made some of my best friendships in college. But a lot of my time there was hanging out with friends or getting drinks or whatever it was, just hanging out on campus. And this epiphany hit me one day that when we graduated at the end of that school year, that none of that was going to be a thing anymore. That we were going to have to go to work for the next 40 to 50 years of your life. You'd have to dedicate 8 to 10 to 12 hours a day, 5 days a week. And it hit me so hard that in that exact moment, I was always passionate about broadcasting, but in that exact moment I went, I don't want to have a job I hate, because if I hate my job, it's going to trickle down to everything else in my life. And I made that my goal in that exact moment, that I was going to have a job that I at least kind of liked going to, and that I would define success from that moment as being excited to do what I was going to do that day, and then being proud of what I did at the end of the day. And when that's your starting point, when that's your jumping off point, it really can't get bad from there. If you're enjoying what you do every single day, sure, some days are long. And sure, I flew on 70 something flights last year, to do these interviews for both my YouTube channel and for the TV show I was on, Deco Drive. But it's all driving back at the same point of like, I'm so grateful that I get to do this. And if it all comes back to gratitude, I think that's what makes it easy.
Yeah, I can't agree more. I mean, there are definitely times where, you feel that sense of overworkness and, you kind of wonder what's this all building towards. But at the end of the day, anything I do in the broadcast industry, it's stuff I'm passionate about. I mean, I would never complain about, talking wrestling with a wrestling personality like yourself. Like this is at the end of the day, even though it's a very demanding business, I feel like it's also a very rewarding business. And when you talk about, 40 to 50 years of doing some sort of job, you want to make sure that that job is something that not only you're passionate about, but something that you're excited to go to every day. Obviously, we're in weird times right now with everyone kind of staying at home. How you touched on the fact that you've been doing interviews every day. How does Chris Van Vliet stay busy when he's at home?
So it kind of sucks that I can't go to the gym anymore, because that was like kind of the way I started every day. I'm not a coffee drinker, so going to the gym was kind of like, boom, like let's get the day started. So now I'm doing workouts at home. I was driving or flying to do interviews. Obviously, that's not a possibility now. So I'm doing these live stream interviews on my YouTube channel, which have been really cool because I get to interact with the fans as it's going on. And it's also like a nice way to say thank you to the viewers, because they're the whole reason that I'm able to even have a YouTube channel or a podcast. So that's what I've been doing a lot of, but it's also just like, it's looking forward to what's next as well. I've been taking acting classes for the last several months. I've done some acting, and I've been in a few commercials recently, and actually was in a movie in the fall. That's something I also want to get into more. So it might not sound like real work, but I've been watching movies and kind of like looking at them from like a little bit of a different angle now, and just appreciating like what goes into those performances that much more. I was actually supposed to move to Los Angeles last week and was going to really dive into the YouTube stuff, the podcasting, the hosting, and also the acting. And obviously that has to be put on hold until things get back to normal. But I'll be in LA a month or two. I mean, your guess is as good as mine to when things get back to normal, but that's what I'm really setting my sights on now.
Absolutely. And we talked about the 4 to 5 years of seeing AEW down the line. You mentioned you're moving to LA and you'll explore other opportunities down there. Where do you see yourself in 5 years?
I would love to be hosting a show that's on like a big national level. Like I've always had such a great respect for Mike Rowe hosting a show like Dirty Jobs, or if I could host a show like on Discovery Channel or something like Amazing Race, that's something I would love to do. One of the cool components of my job in Miami was not only did I get to interview these movie stars and celebrities, but I also did this segment called Keeping Up with Chris, where I like basically did these crazy adventures that you could only do in South Florida. Like I drove a tank. I caught a 480-pound Goliath grouper. I swam with an alligator. And like I did all these things because like, number one, I basically just handed them my bucket list and said, do you think I can do these things? And they said, sure, that would make great TV. But number two, I just wanted to show that like anyone can do anything. And I think the biggest thing that stands in the way for most of us is ourselves. And the whole point of this segment was to basically show, hey, look, it's possible. Anyone can do anything. And that's kind of what I want to be able to bring to the TV world. So 5 years from now, hopefully I have 1 million subscribers. That's been my 5-year goal, and continue to do these interviews and continue to have these great conversations and share people's stories. But I'd love to be hosting something on a bigger scale, and hopefully you'll see me in a few more movies soon as well.
Yeah, I mean, that would be really cool. Obviously, looking down the line, that's huge. And you talked about kind of the essentialness of having your own personality in the product you put out. And for me personally, I remember it took me, I want to say at least a semester to kind of find my voice and find the style of writing. I like which words I like to enunciate, stuff like that. When did you, in your career, kind of come to find who Chris Van Vliet really was?
Well, I remember someone saying to me, this is going to be, great for you to remember, that if you don't look back on your old stuff and like cringe, you're doing something wrong. So I think that look, I had that first job in news that I was kind of telling you about, and I worked there for 17 months. So almost exactly a year and a half. And I think I was just starting to find my voice when I got this job with MTV2 Canada. And that's when I really was able to like kind of just speak unscripted, just kind of like we would just kind of talk. It was like a TRL style show. So they'd go, all right, you have 30 seconds and you're throwing to the new video from Yellow Card. And you'd be like, oh. And that was, I think, when I really was able to find my personality and find what I liked about myself. And people always say in the broadcasting world, you just got to be yourself, which I don't necessarily think is true. I think you have to be like the amped up best version of yourself. Because if you're just on TV and you're low energy, like in the same way that you would talk to your sibling or your parent or your friend or something, no one's going to want to watch that. You got to be like your best amped up version of yourself. Like the girl that you like just said yes when you asked her to prom. Like that's the version of yourself I think that you need to be on TV. And when I started to realize that I thought I had turned it up to 10 and maybe I only turned it up to like 7.5 or something. When I realized, this is really what a 10 out of 10, version of me is on TV. Probably like 2-ish years in is when I really started to find myself. And then I look back at that stuff now and go, oh, that was just brutal.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, whenever I look back on any past clips I've done, I'm always just like, what was I thinking? I don't know why I said that or stuff like that, but it's cool because you get to kind of see yourself evolve, not only as on-air personality, but as a person. You look back and you kind of realize my thought process now is completely different than it was a year ago, which is really cool. Only a couple questions left. One I wanted to touch on was your dream interview. You've interviewed so many people in the wrestling world, in the entertainment world. Who's that one person? It can be pro wrestling related, movie related, anyone that you would love to just sit down, unscripted, 30 to 60-minute conversation. Who's it going to be?
So number one on that list was The Rock for the longest time. And I've had the good fortune of being able to interview The Rock 9 times. Not that I'm counting or anything, but so The Rock was there.
If you can drop interviewing The Rock, you drop interviewing The Rock. That's someone to be
The
proud
Rock
of.
was at the top of the list for the longest time, and I got to interview him. And then I was like, all right, now that I've interviewed The Rock, Tom Cruise is who I want to interview. And I've such a great respect for Tom Cruise's work ethic, and he's so incredibly talented. And Tom Cruise is one of those people that I said I put 1,000% of myself into something. Tom Cruise must put like 10,000% of himself into everything. So then I got to interview Tom Cruise, Mission Impossible, red carpet in Paris, in the shadow of the Eiffel Tower. Like, it really couldn't have gotten better. So now that I've kind of crossed those 2 big ones off the list, Vince McMahon is the person I would love to have a conversation with. I don't know that it'll happen, but I'm going to keep throwing it out there.
Absolutely. Your mantra that you've grown, I'm not sure exactly when it started, but you have it on shirts now and everything, and it's vague goals get vague results. It's something that I've kind of taken into my life. I'm big on that. We touched on before we started this recording, the AJ Styles never rest, never rust type thing of just being very goal oriented, being very passionate from the get-go and never giving that up. When did that mentality kind of come in for you, and when did you decide, like, no, what I want to do, I'm going to make it concrete and I'm not going to stop till I achieve that?
Well, I firmly believe that anything's accomplishable. And if someone else is doing something that you want to do, that just means that you can also do it as well. They've now laid a blueprint for you to do it. But it was early on for me. Like, I remember my mom tells a story of, like, I really wanted a hamster when I was like 8 years old. And I'm like, can I have this hamster? My mom said, well, if you can do A, B, and C, then you can get the hamster. And I'm like, well, okay then. Like, and sure enough, it took me a few weeks to, it was like, raise a certain amount of money, like clean your room, whatever it was. And I did it. And my mom went, oh, okay, well, I said to do this and you did it, so there you go. And that's just kind of always been the way that I've been. And I did a lot of fishing. I'm very big into bass fishing. And that was like part of my mentality growing up. When I would fish in these fishing tournaments or these fishing competitions, I would just set this goal of, like, this is the thing I want to do. And I think that being in sports really helped that, because sports makes you competitive, and sports makes you go, that's what the guy next to me is doing, or that's what the other team's doing. Let's be better at that. And that's always been my mentality. Like, I'm super competitive. Like, if you and I are like going to go, I don't know, like get the mail from the mailbox, better believe that I'm going to be running that mailbox faster and grabbing that mail before you. That's just the type of person that I am. And I think that too many people set these very vague goals in their life. They, New Year's Eve comes around and they go, all right, this year I'm going to lose some weight, which is a terrible goal to set, because there's no beginning, middle, or end to that goal. If you lose a pound, you have now lost some weight and you've accomplished your goal. So I think that it's important to set not just specific goals in terms of numbers, but also dates. So I want to lose 15 pounds by July 1st, or I want to have 1,000 YouTube subscribers by December 31st, or whatever it is. And then what happens along the way is now you have something to progress up to. And sure, if you don't hit that goal, that's okay, because you're way further along now than you would have been if you hadn't set a goal.
Yeah, I can't agree more. Those are all the questions I have. Chris Van Vliet, a hero of mine, a hero to many, and just one of the most well-versed guys, I feel like, in this industry in terms of your adaptability to hone your skills and, put them on to your passions. Anything, I know you have a lot going on, anything you want to plug at the end of this interview?
First of all, thank you, Lee. I mean, congrats to you on everything. You are way further ahead than I was when I was a sophomore in college. So congrats to you. And just keep going on that path. And when you graduate, you're just going to be crushing it. So that's amazing. Congrats to you. And thank you for the time to do this. And thank you to anyone who's listening to this who might be familiar with my work. And if not, well, I hope you maybe have some little nugget that you can take away from this.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll drop your YouTube link in the description. I know my 19 subscribers probably aren't going to bring any big views to your channel, which is on its way to 7 figures, but nonetheless, I have a lot of friends who maybe don't care for wrestling, but they care about broadcasting, they care about determination, and that's kind of where I want to go with this interview, is talk about all things, not just about wrestling, not just about broadcast, but about life, talking about staying focused, your goals and everything. It's definitely been a great inspiration to me, and I guarantee to thousands more who watch your content. So Chris Van Vliet, thank you so much for taking the time, and we will see you guys next time on the Liam Crowley interview series.